Comrades and friends, happy Native Heritage Month. I was going to rock my mocks for Rocky Mocks Week, but with this weather, it had been destroyed. We meet on stolen Lenni Lenape land. U.S. history is all lies meant to erase the indigenous nations and millions of people who lived here for untold millennia before the invasion. That's why Workers' World Party joins United American Indians of New England every year for National Day of Mourning. And I want to encourage, I want to urge each of you here or listening in to consider going next Thursday for the 49th Annual Day of Mourning. It's not like any other demonstrations you attend, in character or just in the feeling of being there. National Day of Mourning began in 1970 as a result of the suppression of the truth. Wamsutta, an Aquinnah Wampanoag man, had been asked to speak at a fancy Commonwealth of Massachusetts banquet celebrating the 350th anniversary of the landing of the Pilgrims. He agreed. The organizers of the dinner, using as a pretext the need to prepare a press release, asked for a copy of the speech he planned to give. He agreed. A few days later, Wamsutta was told by a representative of the Department of Commerce and Development that he wouldn't be allowed to give his speech. The reason given was the theme of the anniversary celebration is brotherhood, and anything inflammatory would have been out of place. They didn't want the truth, comrades and friends. Wamsutta had used as a basis for his talk one of their own history books, a pilgrim's account of their first year on Turtle Island. The book told of the opening of his ancestors' graves, taking their food supplies, the wheat, the beans, the corn, and the selling of his ancestors as slaves for 220 shillings apiece. Wamsutta was going to tell the truth, but the truth was out of place. The reason that we have a national holiday for Plymouth and not Jamestown Colony is that Jamestown settler history is far too well known and far too ugly. It was a slave block, for one, and the white settlers in Jamestown actually turned to cannibalism to survive. It's just not a really pretty story to tell the kids in school. Now, the Pilgrims didn't find empty lands here any more than Cristobal Colon discovered anything. Every inch of this land is indigenous. The Pilgrims didn't come here seeking religious freedom either. They already had that in Holland. They came as part of a commercial venture to make themselves rich, and they introduced racism, patriarchy, anti-lesbian and gay bigotry, repression of two-spirits, jails, the class system, and capitalism to this continent, Turtle Island. One of the very first things they did when they arrived on Cape Cod before they got to Plymouth was to rob Wampanoag graves at Cornhill and steal as much of the native villagers' provisions of corn and beans as they were able to carry. And no, they didn't even land at Plymouth Rock. That little rock that was cleared from land for farming and made into a monument to racism and oppression that UAINE was proud to have buried twice. The Mayflower. Yeah, the Mayflower has been boarded in past demonstrations, and the Union Jack ripped from the mast and replaced with the flag that was flown over liberated Alcatraz Island. The roots of Day of Mourning have always been firmly embedded in the soil of militant protests. About the only thing true in this whole mythology is that these pitiful, greedy, grabbing thieves wouldn't have survived their first several years in what they named New England without the aid of Wampanoag people. What they got in return for this help was genocide, thefts of the lands, and never-ending repression. But back in 1970, the organizers of the fancy state dinner told Wamsutta he couldn't tell the truth, and they would only let him speak if he agreed to deliver a speech that they were going to provide. Wamsutta said no. Instead of speaking at the dinner, he and hundreds of Native people and supporters from throughout the hemisphere gathered in Plymouth and observed the first National Day of Mourning. And every year since then, UAINE has returned to Plymouth to demonstrate against this pilgrim mythology, which is still taught in schools. And to every immigrant wanting citizenship, it's even on the goddamn citizenship test, trust me. The first actual Thanksgiving dinner was proclaimed in 1637 by Governor Winthrop to celebrate the safe return of men from Massachusetts who had gone to Mystic, Connecticut to massacre over 700 Pequot women, children, and men. And it's just one more disgusting reminder of the genocide that they celebrated with our native foods that Native people grew and ate for thousands of years. our Turtle Island harvest feast that they commodified and sell. In 1997, and some of you here may have been there, Plymouth cops attacked the Day of Mourning marchers. Grandmothers and children were maced when the march crossed the path of the annual Pilgrims procession. Now, this itself is a sort of a telling thing, and they still do this. When they recreate each year the Pilgrims landing, the rich men walk in first, followed by the wives, and then the servants come along behind carrying the bags. And they still get people to volunteer to be the servants. I don't know. They attacked the native marchers, they arrested 25 people, and they split up the court dates to make it hard for supporters to travel repeatedly from Boston to Plymouth to testify as witnesses or pack the courtrooms. But during that struggle, there was a surprising response from tourists who threatened to boycott. And then suddenly Plymouth agreed to drop all the charges of those arrested, and that UAINE has the right to march every day of mourning without a permit, and they actually paid some small reparations. Which was maybe the first reparations that was paid in this country, I don't know. One of Trump's first acts was to come down hard on Standing Rock and go all out in support of all fossil fuel extraction, damn the consequences to clean water and air and the lands. The Indian Wars have never ended, comrades. Manifest destiny became the imperialist mantra to take over the globe. You all saw the attacks on Standing Rock. Attacks on Native people always turn deadly. This administration has now attacked the Indian Child Welfare Act that helps keep Native children with their families and community. There's a really long history of stealing children in this country. Thousands of Native children have been stolen just from the Lakota and Dakota nations alone. This is an incredibly important struggle nationally throughout the Native community. You can see where the idea came from when they started separating children from immigrants at the border with Mexico. They don't do that to immigrant families of European descent, do they? Interior Head Zinke, I don't know how to say his name, led the attack on Bears Ears. And now the Bears Ears are sacred ancestral lands to Navajo, Hopi, Zuni, Ute, Mountain Ute, and I'm not sure how to say their name, but Wintah Unare Ute nations, who united and won monument status for 1.3 million acres with unprecedented indigenous oversight. Well, Trump stripped control from the Native nations over all of this and the uranium, oil, and gas deposits, as well as the cultural heritage of their ancient ruins. And Bears Ears is densely packed with ancient cultural resources. Pueblo and ancestral ruins in the area are thousands of years old. There are also ancient and unique dinosaur remains of scientific interest. So why did Zinke and the Utah settlers want to strip this monument? They want uranium mining to start up again to make nuclear bombs. The military even uses leftover depleted uranium. DU used by the U.S. military left parts of Iraq poisoned to the extent that the Iraqi women in Fallujah have been warned to not get pregnant because their babies are born without limbs, comrades. Now, our comrades uncovered that war crime, and we publicized it years ago in the Iraq War Crimes Tribunal. After the U.S. bombed Japan, they mined 30 million tons of uranium on the Navajo Reservation in the Four Corners area of the Southwest. The Dene Nation took the brunt of mining the radioactive uranium ore. There have long been clusters of birth defects and stillbirths of Dene children in the Shiprock, New Mexico mining area. The National Institutes of Health reported in 1992 that over 320 kinds of congenital conditions have been detected in Indian Health Service IHS hospital records from Shiprock. University of New Mexico researchers even found uranium in the blood of Dene infants. This is the imperialists wanting to ditch the nuclear treaties. Hey, more treaties to break, right? Uranium prices remain low, but Trump has started the process to produce more nukes. The nuclear arms race began, if I can remind you, with the intention to make a first strike attack against the USSR. And the U.S. has more than all other countries combined. It surrounds the Korean Peninsula with nuclear bombs. Trump said he wanted to use them. In October, North Dakota passed legislation to prevent Native voters at Standing Rock, Fort Berthold, Spirit Lake, Turtle Mountain, and Lake Traverse reservations from voting by requiring ID with a street address. And most of them have had P.O. box addresses, which is not uncommon in some rural areas. Celebrations on election night in North Dakota included celebrating the defeat of the man that introduced that bill by Ruth Buffalo, a Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara, and Chiricahua Apache woman. So, comrades, fighting ruling class lies means raising awareness that indigenous peoples are not dead and gone. We live amongst you, despite smallpox, genocide, constant warfare, from coast to coast in urban areas, small towns, as well as the reservations. We have a vast heritage, even if you consider only the indigenous foodstuffs, as over half of the world's foods, by species and tonnage, are native to this hemisphere and were created and grown for thousands of years before we were invaded. Now, Native people commonly talk about decolonization and Native erasure, and that term means the leaving out of Native people in daily discourse, whether in the mass media, the educational system, even in progressive conversations. Our heritage is made to appear to come from anywhere but Native peoples. And Native peoples are referred to when there's a hot struggle like Standing Rock, even though then it's still a hard fight to get media coverage, but are forgotten in the progressive movement, the rest of the time. Yet every single struggle connects back to genocide of Native nations. So I urge each and every one of you to reconsider your plans for next Thursday. Sahai's got tickets in the back. Thank you for waiting in the storm, Sahai. And if you're listening in, you can call Sahai and reserve your tickets tomorrow. Those of you who get a bus ticket, check the weather the day before and dress accordingly. After the noon rally, we march around Plymouth, and Mourning James, who carries on Frank Wamsuta James's work of exposing this true history, guides the march with historical truth. And there's a potluck social following the march, the rally and the march, so you'll have a beautiful meal with everyone before the bus leaves. And just to say, preference for first seating at dinner is given to elders, young children and caretakers, pregnant women, people with disabilities, and people who have traveled a long distance. It's a great day and a moving event. Please join us. Comrades, you'll learn a lot, you'll make new friends, you'll have a great time, and you'll be able to go back home and educate your family and friends about the true history of these stolen lands. End Native erasure, water is life, fight for Mother Earth.